Human trafficking is a highly profitable crime that is happening all around the world, and it's a serious violation of human rights. It's estimated that there are 40 million people in the world affected by human trafficking, including 25 million of those who are forced to labor force, and those who are forced into forced marriage, like 15 million in total. Statistics shows that exploitation in labor force surpasses sexual exploitation, and that more and more victims are male. The majority of identified victims in Europe are women, and 1/3 of the victims are minor. Even the labor force is increasing. The exploitation in a sexual business or sexual exploitation is still the most visible way of human trafficking. So what is human trafficking? It always consists, or it is composed always of 3 basic elements. It is mobilization, means, and exploitation. All of these together leads to human trafficking. So how does it actually work? First, human traffickers act. This includes recruiting of victims, transportation to the place of exploitation, hiding them from authorities, and receiving victims from other traffickers. This may be done. Victims of human trafficking are often deceived. It can be done partially or totally. In case of, if they are deceived partially, it means that they know, for example, they know the nature of the work, but they don't know anything about conditions. They can be transported regular way or irregularly, and they may be accompanied, or they are simply instructed how to get to the place of exploitation. Victims of trafficking are always taken to the countries where the profit is the highest and where is a huge demand for this. So why victims doesn't say no, or why they just don't run away? Because traffickers use different means. This includes abuse of power, abuse of vulnerability of victims. Often they just coerce to do victims what they want. This includes also abduction or abducting of victims. Sometimes traffickers promise small payments or small presents. This happens usually in the first part within the recruitment, when they try to create a space of trust towards victims. So the victims is more likely to do what they... And why traffickers do this? Because the aim of human trafficking is always exploitation. And exploitation may include 3 basic categories, like sexual exploitation, exploitation of labor force in construction, gastronomy, agriculture, domestic works, begging, or different other different criminal activities, and it includes also removal of organs. What are the causes of human trafficking? It's always interlinked and complex problem, and it includes economic, social, and political factors. While poverty alone does not necessarily lead to human trafficking, but when it is combined with other factors, this may lead to a higher risk of being trafficked. And the other factors may include lack of access to education or job, disruption of family, corruption in the country, lack of human rights, civil unrest, and many others.
Thank you, Adriana. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Emilie Balestra. I've been working at the IOM office in Bern for about 4 years on human trafficking issues, and we thought today it would be interesting for you to know about the situation in Switzerland. What is the extent of the phenomenon here? So human trafficking does exist here in Switzerland. Often people are not aware of it. Often we have this idea that it takes place very far away from us. But it does exist, and we have estimated that around 250 persons are identified and receive assistance every year. These 200 persons, it seems a lot, but not a lot. We always say it's the tip of the iceberg, because we know that so many more people are subjected to be victims in Switzerland. The issue is, how do we come to those people? How do we know? How do we detect those situations? So mainly in Switzerland, victims who are identified are young women forced into prostitution. They come from several countries, including Eastern Europe, Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, Nigeria. Also Nigeria is one of the countries of origin, as we will explain later. Even more difficult to detect are those situations that Adriana described before, labor exploitation, because it happens in the clandestine environment. How do you detect a situation of exploitation in a private household, for instance? And this is one of the challenges we have to face, and we will also come back to that later. Switzerland is fighting against human trafficking. There are a variety of stakeholders who are involved in the fight against human trafficking. So you have federal agencies. Today we have a representative of FEDPOL there, Anna, and also a representative of the Federal Department of Foreign Affairs. But you have also victim assistance centers, you have the law enforcement authorities, police, NGOs. We have Eva here from the FIDS, she will talk to us later. And all these actors come together in a strategy against human trafficking. This strategy is in a national document. It's a bit theoretical, I don't want to go into details, but always we have to look at four big area of actions. We have prevention, protection of the victim, prosecution of the authors, and also partnerships, which is key. And you see in every canton, we have also cooperation mechanism when people get together and try to deal with these situations. I want to give you a specific example of one aspect of how can we assist victims. It's what we do at IOM Bern in Switzerland. For instance, we are assisting victims to return to their home country if they wish to. So if a victim is identified in Switzerland and she wants to return home, then she can get assistance for this. And why do we do this? Well, because we would like to diminish the risk of re-trafficking, saying if a person goes back to her home country, then, and if she remains in the vulnerability situation, then she may come again to the circle of exploitation. So the idea behind this is to give a second chance, basically, and there's a whole lot of services that can be provided. There is a preparation for the return. We identify what is to be done in terms of security, etc. I don't want to go into too much details. And then there is an assistance to set up a project, to, for instance, a business, to start a new life, to earn an income, and then to avoid falling into the cycle again. I think the most interesting for you is that if I illustrate such stories with the story of Joy, a Nigerian woman that we assisted here in Switzerland and who returned to her country. So, and this will also illustrate the kind of mechanism behind human trafficking. So Joy used to live in the Edo state in Nigeria, and she was struggling to find an income, to find employment, and she had to cover the daily needs of her family. So hopeless, she was telling her friend how the economic situation was difficult for her and her family. This friend told her, look, I know 2 men in Lagos, they can find a job for you in Europe. So after meeting the 2 men, Joy accepted the offer. She thought, I'm so looking forward to work as a hairdresser in Italy. There I will be able to find income to cover for my family. So she left Nigeria with a group of 15 other persons. They went through Niger and then to Libya, from where they embarked on a boat with all the risks that we know it entails. Approximately 1 week after her arrival in Italy, she was received by a woman who instructed her about the job that was waiting for her. She would have to work as a prostitute every day. And Joy was surprised. She explained that it was not the job that was promised to her. But then the woman reacted in an aggressive way. She insulted her, she threatened her. If she dared not doing what she instructed, then she would denounce her to the police because she was illegal here in Italy anyway. Or she would, you know, the 2 friends in Lagos, they know where her family lives. They could also threaten her. Scared, she did not really have choice. She worked for several months for this person, and she was constantly controlled. She could not choose her client, she could not choose her days of work or working hours, and she had to hand a lot of money to her, most of her income to her boss, because the boss said, well, you have to pay back the costs of your travel before you can earn an actual salary. One day she could not stand the situation anymore, that was too much, and she decided to try to escape. She succeeded. She jumped on a train that brought her to Switzerland, and she arrived in Chiasso, where she asked for asylum in a reception center. During the asylum interviews, the Swiss officials noticed that something was wrong, that she may be a victim of trafficking. So she was heard another time on her story, and then a few weeks later she found out about the return assistance possibility, and she decided she wants to go back to her family because she was lucky she has a nice family environment at home. It's not the case for every people in this situation. So the return counselor and IOM conducted a risk assessment, they clarified the travel, everything. And she also went to the embassy in Bern, in the Nigerian embassy, to get her travel document. Then she left Switzerland, it was in 2016, and she was received in Lagos by IOM and accompanied back to Benin City in the Edo state. There she was welcomed by her family, she was put in touch with an NGO, and she could think about what do I want to do with my project. With the money I get from the Swiss government. And she participated in a business training, and then she chose to open a small shop selling soft drinks in the street. This new income allowed her to find, to cover her family's needs, and her family also played a role in her reintegration process. When we last talked to her in end of 2017, she was very satisfied with the situation in Nigeria. This is one of the examples. It's one example among thousands. Does not mean that it's always that scenario. There are thousands of scenarios. It can be a man working on construction site. It can be a woman in a domestic household. But this is just to illustrate that it comes a bit reality in your mind. But what I want to share with you today is one single message, is that Joy could receive the help she received because someone at some point saw that something was not normal, that her story was something that it is not a normal story, that she has been exploited, and that she could be a victim of trafficking. And this is one of the reasons why we are doing prevention and awareness raising together with all our partners, with the Swiss government also, to simply be able to detect those cases. Because as Adriana mentioned, we've hardly seen a victim come and say, hey, I'm a victim of trafficking. This doesn't exist because maybe because this person fears the traffickers, maybe because she has been instructed to distrust any person who would talk to her, maybe because she's controlled and cannot leave the house where she's staying. Also because she's dependent from the traffickers, she's brainwashed kind of. And also because many of these persons do not feel themselves that they are being exploited, because they don't know the laws in place here, they don't know what is human trafficking. So if these people are not able to report themselves, to ask for help, then maybe one of us once can be the link, can make the link and say, well, this situation is not normal, I should report to someone, or I should try to help this person escape. I wanted to show you, to illustrate this. On your table where we explain what is trafficking. It's actually in the framework of one of our projects where we went around Switzerland with an information bus to just explain what it is and what we should do in case we come across such a situation. Again, how do we recognize a victim? This is in your brochure. There are signs that may give you a hint. It doesn't mean that all of those taken individually mean that it's trafficking, but really it's a hint to assess, for instance, if the person works under exploitative conditions, if she's mistreated, if she doesn't have documents, if she's a bit lost, if she doesn't know the language, the environment, if she has sign of mistreatment, she's under pressure, etc. We've already talked about this. You also have in the brochure a few contacts, what to do, who to contact. Well, it depends on the situation. Sometimes the police, if the person agrees, if the situation allows it. If not, victim assistance centers. The FITS, for instance, Eva is a representative, she's based in Zurich. If you would be in Geneva, then it would be Cœur des Grottes or Astrée in Lausanne. I mean, there are many people who can help those persons. So it was just to say that this is also why the reason we are here. Thank you for your interest. Thank you for being here today. We are here in the middle of the counter-trafficking weeks, and it's really our aim to just talk about the topic and together open our eyes. If you are more interested, you can check out the website of the 18th of October for more information, and I thank you for your attention.
The Chief of Mission in Bern, Ambassador Pierre Rose, Mr. Pierre Rose, Ambassador for Development, Mr. Pedro Mona, our resource persons who have succeeded in educating us better on human trafficking, our invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to, on behalf of the Nigerian Embassy, welcome you to this very important occasion. And we want to put it on record that IOM has supported us in a lot, both morally and financially. We want to thank you for doing this, and we appreciate it. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to welcome you all to the fourth Swiss counter-trafficking campaign, an awareness-raising event on human trafficking organized by the International Office of Migration in collaboration with the Nigerian Embassy in Bern. This event is organized to educate Nigerians on the issue of trafficking and also enlighten the audience on the prevention of human trafficking in Switzerland. I would like to congratulate the organizers for this insightful initiative. Human trafficking is the acquisition of an individual by improper means such as force, fraud, or deception with the aim of exploiting them It is a lucrative transnational crime involving the recruitment, manipulation, and abuse of vulnerable victims. Human trafficking is another name for modern-day slavery, wherein the victims involved are forced, coerced, deceived into labor and sexual exploitation. Therefore, human trafficking is a global modern-day slavery, and the problem remains severe. Human trafficking preys on the vulnerable and voiceless. For this reason, the International Office of Migration and other agencies in Switzerland, in collaboration with the Nigerian Embassy, are determined to raise awareness on this modern-day slavery and give its survivors a voice. This gesture is apt and laudable. Statistically, the figures are scary. Almost 600,000 to 800,000 women and children are annually trafficked across national borders. This does not amount for the number that are trafficked within their own countries. Most human trafficking victims are actually duped into the trade by the false promises regarding job opportunities. Many women from third world countries, like Nigeria, are lured into this trade with the bet of false marriages. Many of the victims are forced to either directly with violence or indirectly with psychological blackmail into the trade. Once they enter the countries of the trade, their passports are confiscated with no money, no shelter, and no one to turn to. They are left at the mercy of those who trade in human beings. Human trafficking is a multifaceted threat that robs people of their right of freedom. This, I say, is inhuman. The victims end up devastated, demoralized, depressed, and defeated. Those that suffer physical and emotional abuse or rape may never be able to live normal lives again. Those that are threatened live in constant fear and end up being psychologically compromised. The impact of human trafficking is chilling. Although the brunt of it is faced by the victims, the nation suffers as a whole. Safety and security, the privileges of living in a free country for the victims are compromised. The Nigerian government sets up the National Agency for the Prohibition of Trafficking in Persons, NAPTIP, on 14th July 2003. The agency is the federal government of Nigeria's response to addressing the scourge of trafficking in persons. It is a fulfillment of the country's international obligation under the Trafficking in Persons Protocol to prevent, suppress, punish, and traffic persons, especially women and children, supplementing the United Nations Transnational Organized Crime Convention, UNTOC. However, so much needs to be done by the Nigerian citizens. The problems must be tackled at the grassroots level. All changes must start with the people, for the people. The people must become the eyes and arms of the government and make the crusade their own cause. Then, and only then, we will see an end to human trafficking. Thank you for your attention, and God bless you.
Your Excellency, Ambassador Madugu, thank you very much for these words. I'm very happy to be here today. I think the presentations we've heard have somehow woken up or reawakened in us a certain sensation about this issue. As head of mission of the International Organization for Migration here in Bern and for Switzerland, and on behalf of the entire organization, I'd like to cordially welcome all of you, Nigerian friends, at this awareness-raising event on the fight against trafficking in human beings and exploitation. We do greatly appreciate that the Nigerian Embassy agreed to prepare this event. Thank you again. Recognizing the importance of raising awareness about trafficking in human beings. And as you said, Ambassador, the people are the eyes, and I think this is really what my colleagues were saying just earlier on. You can all help us somehow, and that's what we are trying to somehow motivate, and not just in this community, but in different communities related to victims of trafficking, potentially related. It's when they come forth and report and say, look, I've seen something that wasn't right. I've seen a person who might be in trouble. Can you help? You know, and this is how we identify, in fact, victims. Since 2008, at IOM Bern, we've assisted 220 victims, and most of them have been through referrals of this kind. So that's why it's so important for us to reach out. And we are pleased to see so many members of the diaspora interested in the topic. It is already a tradition that these October days have been dedicated for now already a few years to preventing and combating trafficking of human beings in Switzerland. In cooperation with our partners, on the 10th of October, we opened the 4th edition of these Swiss Counter-Trafficking Weeks, which take place exactly around October the 18th, the annual European Anti-Trafficking Day. Yesterday I was in Geneva in front of the university on the 18th of October speaking about this issue. And a lot of young people were also interested. It is an opportunity for the public to participate in the events and receive information to better understand the mechanisms behind human trafficking, but as we said, also how you can all help. This year the focus is on youth and communities of countries of origin. We have, for example, we have this event. We will be having another event with the Dominican Republic very soon. Altogether, we have 19 events organized in 8 different cantons with 15 different implementing partners. As was mentioned, Switzerland is a country of destination as well as transit for human trafficking. And due to the fact that this violation of human rights occurs in a clandestine manner, the population of Switzerland has limited awareness and access to information about this phenomenon, which also exists here. So just as much as we approach you, we also approach Swiss people and Swiss nationals in the very same way. Therefore, our aim today is to provide information, raise awareness on what trafficking is, how to recognize a victim, what action can be taken by the public, and what types of assistance can be provided by state and non-state organizations. So I really do encourage you to take some of those brochures which have the addresses, telephone numbers of the different help organizations in different cities in Switzerland, Geneva, Lausanne, Zurich. You know, make use of that if you can. Fighting against human trafficking is a pillar of our work at the international level, and this for more than 20 years. In Bern, we've been implementing various projects in this field together with a variety of governmental and non-governmental partners, including our long-lasting cooperation with the Federal Department of Foreign Affairs, and I salute Ambassador Pietro Mona, who is accompanying us today, representing Foreign Affairs. The Federal Office of Police, of course, of which we have a participation today, thank you, and embassies and other partners such as yourselves. Trafficking is an international crime and a human rights violation that needs to be stated and restated. The importance of cooperation at all levels is very important. And I would maybe give you also a few facts that maybe were already mentioned, but doesn't hurt to repeat them. Every year, some of the organizations that are mentioned in the brochure, including FITS in Zurich, identifies and assists more than 250 victims. That may sound, you know, in the context of migration and irregular migration, like maybe a small number, but just imagine 250 human beings who are held practically in slavery, as the ambassador was saying, who can be rescued. And this, by itself, I think, is an aim to fight for. The vast majority of those affected remains unidentified, unfortunately, because human trafficking mostly takes place within this clandestine environment. Hence, again, I repeat, the importance of people such as yourselves who maybe have access to places where you may see things that are not right and are able then to report. The profile of the victims in Switzerland are women between 17 and 30 years old, who mostly have been sexually exploited. But then, of course, there's also labor exploitation, and a few cases are also identified there. And as was mentioned, the most common countries of origin are Eastern Europe, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria. You have Latin America with Brazil and the Dominican Republic. You have Asia, a lot of Thai people. And then in Africa, unfortunately, the biggest number is exactly from Nigeria. So we felt it very important to have this event today, and I'd like to thank the embassy once again. Open questions. I mean, what do we want you to take home today? First of all, obviously, have you ever heard about human trafficking? And we hope that by now you are a little bit more familiar with the concept. Do you know what it is? Why does it happen? And what are the most common types? And we hope that you can take this home today. Do you know who are the victims and who is at risk of becoming a victim? Again, you know the age groups. Maybe you walk out of here today and you say, wait a minute, but I actually saw someone, you know, the other day, and now that I'm thinking and I'm linking to the presentations I've heard today, could it be possibly that that person has a problem? And maybe you go back with a fresh look and you see that indeed there is an issue. And then, of course, what types of industries are involved with human trafficking? Because, yes, obviously prostitution is the most obvious and common, but there are other. There are restaurants, there are maids, there are hotels, you know, several places where people might be exploited. And it's so important that you somehow are aware, because they cannot help themselves. As the ambassador says, a lot of these people are modern-day slaves. They don't have access to their documents. The lady in the video had a mobile phone, but how many of those victims really have access even to a mobile phone? It's very difficult. So again, you know, consider that you could be a lifesaver, and even if you save the life of one person, it's a lot and very important. So thank you very much for your attention.
Your Excellency, Ambassador Babamudugu, caro amico Pier Longerossi, IOM Chief of Mission, dear colleagues, dear friends, it is a particular pleasure being able to participate to this important event together with the Nigerian diaspora. And if I may add, it's also a particular personal pleasure because I had the great honor of working at the ECOWAS Commission in Abuja for 4 years. I've lived in Abuja. I had an enormous, fabulous time in Nigeria, and it's great being back again to an event organized by the Nigerian Embassy. Working at the ECOWAS Commission, that was back in 2009, 2013, in that period of time, I did work together with Nigeria and the government of Nigeria, with the various agencies, including NAPTEP, but also NIS and many others working on migration issues. But we worked in the entire region of West Africa, as it is the mandate of the ECOWAS Commission. And human trafficking was always also an element of the work that we did, sensitizing the government, sensitizing civil society, the people about this scourge that unfortunately is still happening in all regions of the world. And in that, I can only underscore also what has already been stated. Human trafficking is not something limited to faraway places. It is happening here, it is happening also in Switzerland, it is happening all around the world. And unfortunately, millions of women, children, and men do fall victim of human traffickers who make billions of dollars out of the slavery of these people. And so whatever we can do as government officials, as international organizations, as civil society, as human beings, as persons of our communities, we should look into that so that we can together hopefully put an end to human trafficking. Human trafficking is particularly difficult to address, and I think the previous speakers have already alluded to it, because it happens in this clandestine environment, because it happens in the shadows, but also because often victims, they feel ashamed of what they have been forced to do. They feel ashamed of having maybe given up on the hope to be able to help their families. They feel ashamed because they didn't realize what was going to happen with them up until the moment when they saw that they would fall into a trap and couldn't get out of it. Victims also fear to reach out. They fear to reach out to any persons, but also they fear to reach out, obviously, to officials, to the police, to other bodies that could help them, because they have been almost brainwashed to believe that they can't do anything. They are victims, they are helpless, they don't deserve any assistance. And so it is important that we change that narrative. It's important that we reach out, that we open our eyes, as has been said. And so a lot of that comes actually down to the notion of being able to also create a context of trust, rebuilding the trust of the victims of trafficking, slowly regaining their ability to speak out, to tell the stories as We've heard from the young woman from Nigeria, Joy, who managed to get her story out and then managed to get a solution and managed to get back to her family and have, again, a good life in Benin City. And this is where organizations like FITS are doing a tremendous job, because they often are the first ones able to reach out to the victims in a situation where it takes a lot of work, a lot of time to build up the trust and to regain access to the victims of human trafficking, and slowly bringing them to the position where they can tell their stories, where really also then the official instruments can come in to protect them. And so you have already realized human trafficking is a top priority also for the Swiss government. We do work together with our international partners, and I will tell a bit more about what we're doing together with Nigeria. We do also work together as a whole of society approach, so with civil society organizations, international organizations, with our cities, local actors, and cantonal actors. We do have here for a national plan of action that allows us to streamline and to have a coherent approach that, as already been mentioned, has 4 pillars. Pillar on prevention, which is always the best solution. The pillar on prosecution, so being also able to work closely together with our legal system to ensure that they have the necessary information and access so that they can prosecute the perpetrators of human trafficking. Protection, it's a critical pillar, and then international partnerships. Maybe putting a little bit more attention on the 4th pillar, international partnerships, where we do have a close and long-standing partnership with Nigeria. I think this partnership with Nigeria is embedded in a broader context. It's embedded in the migration partnership that Switzerland and Nigeria has signed in 2011 that allows us to work on a varied elements on migration issues, but also on human trafficking. We will have actually in December the 10th round of consultations in the context of the migration partnership, and I'm very much already looking forward to receiving the delegation coming from Abuja for the 10th round of these consultations. So for 10 years, we have been very closely working together with the government and the people of Nigeria on migration issues, and I dare to say this has been one of the most successful, one of the most instrumental partnerships that we've had on migration issues, and I think we can say it, that it is also a best practice on how governments work together on complex issues such as migration and including also human trafficking. What do we do in Nigeria? We work very closely together there as well with various actors. At the local level in Nigeria, for example, we have launched earlier this year a project with the association's Women's Aid Collective. The purpose of this initiative is to raise awareness to the danger of trafficking at the local level by engaging communities through traditional and religious leaders, especially in Edo State. In addition, the involvement of survivors of human trafficking is planned in the next year in order to ensure an effective communication, especially at targeted youth. I think here again we see also the importance of reaching out to non-traditional partners such as religious leaders who have a critical role to play in sensitizing their people on the danger of human trafficking. At the policy level, Switzerland is currently in discussion with the National Agency for the Prohibition of Trafficking Persons, NAPTIP, with regards to a project dedicated to the review and updating of Nigeria's National Action Plan Against Human Trafficking. We have a very close relationship with NAPTIP, a very fruitful relationship with NAPTIP, and we do hope that we can assist technically as partners to the development and updating of Nigeria's National Action Plan. The Federal Department of Justice and Police is also very much active in partnering with Nigeria in the framework of police cooperation, awareness raising, or support to reintegration of victims of trafficking. I've just heard that a delegation of the Federal Office of Police, together with other actors, will be visiting Nigeria next month. once more, unfortunately, I can't be part of that delegation. I'm really desperately trying to find a good excuse to go back to Nigeria, but it seems that every time a delegation goes from Bern, I have other commitments. So I do hope that I can correct that in the near future. Last but not least, also our Swiss Humanitarian Aid is present in the northeast of Nigeria, a region that, as you know, has been struck hard also by the terrorism of Boko Haram, but is partnering with IOM Nigeria in that region in a vast project aiming at addressing the mental health consequences of victims of human trafficking. This just gives you a little bit of an overview of what we're doing as part of our migration partnership with Nigeria to look into finding solutions to put an end to human trafficking. It is, as I said, a partnership that we hold very dear, that we are very proud of, and that I think is a cornerstone of what we can do bilaterally together with Nigeria. Now, in conclusion, as I said, I think this is something that all of us can contribute to fighting human trafficking. And I do hope that this afternoon will help you to see what is possible also from your point of view, what you can do as a member of your diaspora, as a member of Switzerland, as a member of your city, of your communities. Unfortunately, human trafficking is a reality that we can only fight against if we combine our forces. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Eva Andoni. I work for about 6 years now for FITS in the field of public relations, advocacy, and formation. Many thanks for having me today and also for the opportunity to present and talk about our work. FITS, this is the advocacy and support for migrant women and victims of trafficking. We are an association which was founded in 1985, so we are 35 years old. We are politically and religiously neutral. We consist of an intercultural team of 25 employees. We do entertain a very broad network with involved actors regionally, but also internationally. And almost half of our financing is for services we provide in victims assistance, but still around a third is donations. What is FITS? We do have 2 counseling centers. One of it is for women, migrant women who were exploited or did face violence, and the other one is the FITS Makasi Center, the Crisis Intervention Center for Victims of Trafficking. I will talk later in more depth about what we do in this Crisis Intervention Center. Beside that, we also do formations like we do today, sensitization, but also political work. We try to actually change also structures and here in Switzerland in order to make the conditions for victims of trafficking, but also for migrant women better in Switzerland. I would like to start with reading a story to you from one of our clients, which was a victim of trafficking, and eventually after she quit this, she could flee this situation, came to our Crisis Intervention Center. Ruta is from an African country. She became pregnant at the age of 15. She moved to the father of the child, but because of different religions, she was rejected by both families. There was no marriage. The man became violent and often disappeared for a long time. In the end, she had 4 children of his. To keep them afloat, she sold homemade food. One day, after another violent episode, she left the children with a grandmother and traveled to a neighboring country. After a few months, to the next country. There she was able to find work until she was promised a contract to work as a housekeeper for a family in the Arab Gulf state. She had to hand over her passport to the agent. And she never saw a contract that she was promised. In the Gulf state, she came to a wealthy family. She was not allowed to leave their house, and her passport remained with the employer. Ruta had her own room. She was allowed to eat, but there was no salary at all. If she made small mistakes, she was yelled at and threatened. In addition, there were massive sexual assaults by the husband and sons of the employer. For fear of accusations, she did not tell the employer about this. After 1 year, Ruta gave up. She wanted to return to her homeland, but the employer refused. She fell ill and became depressed. She stopped eating and could hardly stand anymore. After she recovered a little bit, she got new clothes, and the employer organized her a Schengen visa for Europe. They traveled together to Switzerland, where Ruta was supposed to continue to another country where she should work, but she didn't know what the work would be or where exactly she would go. During her stopover in Switzerland, they were staying at a hotel. She was able to escape. A woman saw her distress and brought her to a police station. The police suspected trafficking of human beings from what she told and contacted FITS. As my colleagues already mentioned, of course, trafficking in human beings happens all over the world and all countries. It has many faces, and the mechanisms change fast, which makes detection also much harder. So we already heard what can make people vulnerable or prone to become victims of trafficking, for example, geopolitical distribution injustices, like the lack of perspective in the own region, but also repressive migration laws in destination countries, and as well the demand in destination countries. Amelie, for example, from Thailand, had to quit university after her mother got cancer. There were no opportunities for her to gain money in Thailand that would provide for enough money for the treatment for her mother. Over a friend, she got into contact with an agency specializing in jobs abroad. That's how she was actually recruited and fell victim to human trafficking. Another factor that makes people vulnerable are precarious socioeconomic positionings like age or sex, sexual identity, if you belong to a minority, for example, but also responsibility for third parties. Most of the victims which are with FITS, Makasi, they bear responsibility not only for themselves, but also for family, for children, or for their community. They try to make a better life, or are even forced by their situation to look elsewhere for a job. Another thing that we regularly see are life crises and upheavals, like, for example, Tina from Hungary. After her husband died, she was alone with the 3 children and with no means and no education to find work which would provide for her family. She started to work in the sex industry in Hungary, but was offered soon a lucrative work opportunity in Switzerland, also in the sex industry, but for more money, of course. So we also heard about why people, while victims of trafficking, cannot just leave the situation of exploitation. The means that are used to keep them in these situations can go from deaths to violence. But also, for example, this financial responsibility we mentioned before can hinder them from actually just leave, because the little bit of money they still make in this situation provides for their family, which they cannot just let down. And even though migration is in most cases, or in many cases voluntarily, they find themselves in a predicament in the end, maybe because their tourist visa expired or because they traveled through illegal channels. They have no work permission here in Switzerland. Another thing that is also used by traffickers is isolation. Already, if you don't speak the language, if you don't know the laws of a society, it's very difficult to get the needed information in order to actually get help. And as was also mentioned before, there is usually a distrust towards authorities, especially police, to actually come forward and to seek help. We also met women who were actually told that, for example, us, FITs, should not be trusted, that we're gonna expose them to the police and they're gonna just be sent home without nothing. So when the victims come to us, they are in very great distress. Many of them have problems sleeping and have great problems trusting anybody, as we mentioned before. Sense of time might be lost due to traumatism. In general, their health is in rather desolate condition. They weren't able to take care of themselves or even see a doctor for a very long time in most cases. So one of the first things our counselors do if they come to us is actually try to see what they need most. This can be just to see a doctor because of toothache. Some of them are pregnant, so they need to deal with this. Sometimes they just wish to have contact with their family, or even to just have a decent meal and sleep. If we hear about what they went through already and what was their situation before, during, and after exploitation, it's not a surprise that all this is going to influence their behavior and how they are interacting with other people. In general, we can say that the detection becomes very more difficult through all this. Self-reportings are rare, and escaping the situation of trafficking, testifying, pressing charges, talking to the police, going through criminal proceedings, the uncertainty of the stay here in Switzerland, or if they are in asylum proceedings, the asylum proceedings themselves are very burdensome. It makes talking about their horrific experiences even harder. Of course, also due to fear or shame to what happened to them, many keep silence. And of course, identification is a process. It takes a long time. Trust must be built. The pressure also, for example, for caring for their children in their homeland must be taken off them. It needs a lot of respect and understanding for their situation, for their culture, for their decisions as well. Our counselors, for example, they have profound knowledge and expertise, not only about the mechanism and background of trafficking, but also about culture, and they also have transcultural understanding, and they speak several languages themselves. If the language is not spoken by one of our counselors, we do have a wide network of translators who are also trained and sensitized, which is crucial. So what can one do if there is a suspicion that something is wrong? We always say that there is no need to actually identify somebody as a victim of trafficking. If there is a sign, if there is a feeling something is not right, we recommend to take contact immediately with specialized organizations such as FITS, which would also counsel the people who are actually reaching out for help, and can also give an estimate about what steps are best to take. If there is a situation where you can actually reach out to the person, which might be a victim, it's best to create unobserved situations so the person can talk. If she starts talking, you should not interrupt her, but let her explain. promoting security and trust is key, which we actually are able to do in our FITS Makasi. And as I mentioned before, try to offer help for her basic needs. What you should not do is to explore their stories in details, because this might re-traumatize the person. A telephone conversation with FITS Makasi, as I already mentioned, is always helpful and can reduce fear for the victim, but also for the person who is reaching out. So how do the victims who are in our victims protection program come to FITS? Because we ourselves, we do not do outreach work. So we depend on others to detect victims and refer them to us. Most cases right now come through other NGOs or counseling centers. This has also something to do with the fact that more and more cases from the asylum sector actually are detected and are referred to FITS. The police forces are also very important, especially those who are specialized in trafficking. For example, in Zurich, there is a special police force which actually is specialized in detecting and helping victims of trafficking. And we do work very closely together with these forces. Very important as well are other authorities, which includes also consulates or embassies, or family and acquaintances, medical persons, but also client friends, we call them, people who buy the services of sex workers. Some of them do come by themselves. It's very rare, but it does happen that they do get the information from our homepage or from our flyers and actually contact us. If we look at the numbers, like the Makasi, our Victims Protection Center, opened in 2004, and since then the numbers constantly rose and became stable at around 200, a little bit over 200 cases a year. I also would like to stress out that these are only the cases who are detected and who are actually referred to FITS Makasi. We do believe that there is a very huge dark number and that most of the cases, also in Switzerland, are not detected. So if we see where the victims come from who are counseled by us, it's the same picture as we already heard before. Most of them, for a very long time now, are from Hungary. We have a lot of victims from Thailand, from Romania, and since about 3 years, also from Nigeria. As I said, like before already, the high number of Nigerian cases has something to do with the sensitization and the formation in the asylum sector. So there are much more victims identified and referred to FITS there. Yeah, I put them in relation to the total of cases we have. 2014, it was only 3 cases. 2017, there was a peak of 24. 2018, only 15. But I know, for example, this year, since we started the project, I'm going to present afterwards also, of today, there are already 23 cases from Nigeria with FITS. The stories of the Nigerian cases also differ, of course. Some of them come directly to Switzerland by plane. Most of them who are with us, they passed over land through Libya and also Italy, Spain, Portugal, or France. Most of them have to pay off huge debts, as my colleague from IOM also mentioned. It's a known strategy. They have to pay for the travels. enormous amounts, unbelievable amounts actually. And also later on, the debt is going to raise because they have to pay for accommodation, they have to pay for clothing and food. So the debts are very difficult also to pay off. I would also like to talk quickly about the legal basis in Switzerland. We already heard that in the penal code, Article 182, trafficking in human beings is penalized. The definition we have there comes from the Palermo Protocol, which is the additional protocol to the UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime. More important for our work, for example, is the Convention Against Trafficking in Human Beings from the Council of Europe, which emphasizes actually much more on victims' protection and victims' rights. We translated them in Switzerland within the Foreign and Integration Act and the Victims Assistance Act. Another convention, a European convention, which is very important also for victims of trafficking, is the European Convention on Human the European Convention on Human Rights. There, Article 4, which prohibits slavery, and Article 3, which contains a prohibition of sending a person back if there is a threat to her life or a threat to unhuman, degrading treatment. For victims of trafficking, this may consist in actually being re-trafficked if sent back, that there is it's very likely that they're going to be re-trafficked, but also if they won't be able to reintegrate in society and to live a life in dignity. I mentioned before the Convention Against Trafficking from the European Council. Here I just listed again the obligations of Switzerland according to this convention. The state has actually an obligation to identify proactively victims of trafficking. He also has to protect them against further violation of their rights, of their human rights. Victims have the right to specialized medical, social, and psychological support, also to legal and social counseling and information, and this from the moment of suspicion. And all these rights we are actually coming into play. This is what the FITS Markazi is there for. There is other things like the recovery and reflection period and the residence permit if they actually cooperate with criminal investigations. If they go back or if they have to go back, there is also obligations from the state to make sure that re-trafficking is not going to happen, that they can go back if anyhow possible by their own will, and if they are accompanied or received by a victim's assistance organization. So what we do in FITS Markazi is, for once, the crisis intervention if a person comes to us, and afterwards the identification. And as I said, this is going to take time, mostly several counselings. Sometimes it can take up to 6 months. Sometimes we are not able to actually reach the person to establish trust. And then the story of this person is also not revealed to us. We do counseling and support. And we do, since 2011, have a safe house where we can accommodate victims of trafficking and provide security for them if needed. A very huge part of our work is the case management. There are many places involved, like doctors, like all medical issues are organized or managed by us. Translators, but also if there is criminal proceedings, we're gonna have lawyers we need to talk to and we need to get in contact with. and prepare the victims we have to talk to police, to the public prosecutor, all these people who actually need something from the victims. We're going to have to manage how we can assure that the best interests of the victims are not forgotten. We also, if the victim has a possibility to stay in Switzerland, which is not easy, even if they cooperate with the authorities for criminal proceedings, after they end, it is very hard to reach, to obtain a residence permit for them. But if this is the case, or if they can also stay for longer term, we do help them with integration, with German courses, etc. Or if they wish so, or if they have to, we assist with return. Also together with IOM and with the State Secretariat for Migration. As we heard many times today, cooperation and partnership is very important. And this is not only because trafficking in human beings is often a transnational crime and police forces need to collaborate with other countries, but also because the protection of victims is so crucial for combating trafficking in human beings. Until today, prosecution can only be successful if the victims do testify. There is no other means of actually showing what happened than by the story told by the victims. It is internationally acknowledged, therefore, that this is more likely when victims are well protected, supported, assisted, and given some sort of perspective, what we try to do with Fit Makasi. On the slide you see what actors are actually involved in order to protect the victim, in order to prosecute the traffickers. In recent years, more and more cases in the asylum sectors, among them, as I said already, many from Nigeria, are detected. And cooperation proceedings are not in place yet. And also, even though detections are made, the victims are not yet protected. 2018, 34 out of 108 new cases with us, with FITS, came from the asylum sector. This corresponds to about a third of all the cases in Makasi. By the end of June this year, there were already 28 new asylum cases. This is already, from all cases, around 40%. But as I said, this is a very small number of the victims who are detected, who are referred to us. We just had an event yesterday with somebody from the State Secretariat of Migration speaking, who also presented numbers. And for example, in 2018, they detected or identified 111 potential victims of trafficking. And none of them were directly referred to FITS for victims' assistance. The difficulties in the field of asylum are many because, victims in the asylum system often are not evidently exploited in Switzerland. It might happen on their journey, when they have to flee, when they transit Libya or Italy. So there is no access to victims' protection and assistance in Switzerland. There is also no clear proceedings established. As I mentioned before, the financement is not assured. The Dublin practice, I don't like the system in place in Europe, where the country of first entry is responsible for the asylum demand of the person, hinders often that victims are detected and protected in Switzerland before they are actually returned to the country of first entry. And also, in the asylum sector, we notice a huge lack and resistance for cooperation with NGOs like us. So for all these reasons, we brought to life a project which we call the Comprehensive Protection for Trafficked Persons in the Asylum Procedures. This project is possible because of the financement of churches. We can run it for 3 years, and we hope that by then we can also change some of the practices of Switzerland. The main pillars are cooperation with the legal counselor, which is very important in the asylum system. We also do education and awareness raising, and as I mentioned, the sustainability aspect, where we seek solutions in order to actually change the system, to fill in the gaps, and to make protection and assistance better for the victims. Many thanks.
From Nigeria. I have 2 questions. At the same time, I have a positive remark. I have experience and suggestion that I think might also help. But let me go with the questions. You mentioned that Fees Makazi helped with counseling whenever it's like the first line when you have a victim, or for them to have a conversation to get to know details of things. And for them to open up to Fees Makazi, it means the personnel, the people involved, should be trustworthy for them to open up to them. So if you have someone from Switzerland speaking to someone who is a victim in Nigeria, he might not want to open up as well. So what is Fees Makazi doing about that in order for the victim to get to open up, to create that or to close that gap of mistrust that came in the first place?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and it's actually not only with victims from Nigeria, but with all victims. They might not open up in the first conversation, and this is also not our goal. Like first, there's really crisis intervention most of the times. We try to give them the space and the room in order to talk when they are ready to talk. And maybe first we need to take care of other things than actually what they experienced. But what helps usually is also the knowledge about mechanisms of trafficking by our counselors.
I have 2 major questions. First one is about the vocabulary that we use. Sometimes we speak about human trafficking, sometimes smuggling of human beings, trafficking in persons, trafficking in human beings. Are we talking of the same thing, or is there a difference somewhere? That's first thing. Then second, directed to you, the Frauen organization goes by the name Frauen. So if there is a male victim of human trafficking, can he also come to you? If not, where else can he go? And I also see that you are based in Zurich. Do you have offices in other cantons where people can eventually report cases? Thank you.
Should I answer the first question? Or? I think I am talking about trafficking by the definition IOM mentioned in the beginning with these 3 elements, which is based on the definition in the Palermo Protocol. So I think trafficking in persons or trafficking in human beings, it's all the same. We at FITS, we try to make, or we don't like to use the term slavery because it's already very, if so, maybe modern slavery, but not slavery alone. And we are specialized in women. Most of the victims who are in FITS Makazi are actually women exploited for the purpose of sexual exploitation. We do also have a lot of transgender women who are with us. exceptionally, we also do, counsel, we do counsel men. We cannot really accommodate them. And this is actually a problem in Switzerland because there is only few specialized victims assistance organizations. I think one of them officially says that they take men, but I would not know how many places they can offer. And I think this is also going to, if the sensitization and of trafficking for the purpose of labor exploitation goes ahead and there are more victims identified in this sector, then we're going to have also a problem because there is more, there are going to be more male victims. But it's on sex work?
No, all three.
Or in general?
Yeah, in general. But if I may,
like,
just the issue here is not when the fraud happens. The fraud may happen in the country of origin, it may happen in the transit period, or it may happen once the person is in the country of destination. To become, so to say, a victim of trafficking, these categories have to be fulfilled. But they can be fulfilled also post-migration. So a person can be very willingly take the services of a smuggler, come to Switzerland, and up until then, legally speaking, his rights or her rights have not been violated. He or she may have violated the administrative rules of entering into Switzerland. If then a third party or person uses that vulnerability and forces that person to do something against his or her will, for example, work as a prostitute, then that person becomes a victim. And then the instruments kick in. So for example, we had a lot of workers, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but this is at least the information still I have in my head, from Eastern European countries that came to Switzerland to work as a cabaret dancer. Just that. No interrelations with men, no sexual favors, nothing. Cabaret dancers. And for that, actually, unfortunately, now we finally got rid of that. But for years, there was a special visa status for cabaret dancers. That would have been legally okay. Unless, again, if that person has been coerced to do that back home. But let's assume that person had willingly agreed to sign a contract as a cabaret dancer to come to Switzerland. Once here, there were a lot of cases of these women then being forced to work not only as cabaret dancers but as prostitutes, so having sexual intercourse with men. That then becomes a situation of violation of her rights. And that turns it into a different category because then her rights have been violated, she becomes a victim, and she needs to be protected, and the persecutor has to be punished. So there is this how to say, this spectrum where things may happen. My message is here, it doesn't really matter when it happened, it matters if it happened, and if it happened, then you do whatever has to be done to protect the victim.
Maybe one last comment as for identification. Eva can certainly answer the question in terms of their special procedures, special questions that our victims ask, and this is the process of how FITS or other organizations identify if this is a victim or not.
We understood that there is no longer a greener pasture anywhere. And even some of us, we are trying to see how we can put ourselves together and go back home and establish things and settle down back home. And my question is that what are you people doing to see how this campaign can be trickled down to the grassroots? I mean, the people that are really victims, especially we, the diaspora, we are the people who suffer more about all this forced labor, exploitation, and this displacement. And from what you from what we understood, we saw that it's more on the government-to-government level, the Swiss government and the Nigerian government. I would have advised, and I don't know, what can you do to see how the diaspora can carry along so that we, the real victim, can benefit, and to see that campaign is also brought back home so that the people back home in Africa, that they understand that Europe is no longer, there is no longer greener pasture in Europe, rather just a kind of a modern slavery or a way of exploitation, so that people can concentrate more back at home, find solutions at home, rather than thinking about migrating to with this fantasy that it is going to be better abroad. So that is my question, sir.
Thank you very much. Just a few thoughts on this. So one of the projects that I briefly mentioned, particularly that is implemented in and around Edo State, works, for example, together with religious leaders. And that speaks maybe not directly to the role of diaspora, but I will come back to that. But it just showcases how we also, together with NAPTIP, the federal agency against trafficking, we're also trying to break it down to the grassroots levels also in Nigeria, because I think the information about the risks of being trafficked, about the risks of irregular migration at large, have to be spread broadly also in the Nigerian population. And this is where we work very closely with the government. But then, in accordance with the government, we reach out to other actors, such as religious leaders. And I think this is quite an interesting approach. By the way, again, this is not specific to human trafficking, but more to the risks of irregular migration in general. We have also supported a project by Nigeria of a TV show that portrays also the risks of irregular migration and sort of tries to debunk a little bit sort of this myth of Europe being a greener pasture and everybody can come and have a great life in Europe. Again, I have to make another parenthesis here. I don't want to say that migration per se is bad. I mean, there are regular ways to migrate, and I think these are very useful for students, for workers. So I'm not depicting everything negatively. Now, when it comes more specifically to the role of the diaspora, I mean, this is exactly one of the events that we are trying to reach out also to the Nigerian community here in Switzerland, together with the embassy, to sensitize you on how to identify victims of human trafficking and to know what can be done. More broadly, at least when I was in Nigeria, I remember that every year there was a big diaspora, a global diaspora conference where diaspora organizations from all around the world came to Nigeria and exchanged with governments and other actors on what the role of the diaspora can be, particularly also in economic growth and so on, investment opportunities, etc. But I mean, you as a Swiss chapter, you could very well also inject the idea into that, if that conference still happens, to have a conference among all the Nigerian diaspora chapters around the world on what the role of the diaspora is exactly on fighting human trafficking. And this is something that we would look favorably into if there is something that you want to follow up. Other than that, I think what is important, maybe also as a follow-up to this meeting, is that you stay in touch with the federal authorities, with specialized organizations like FITS, with the International Organization for Migration, so that this can become a more regular dialogue and this can continue into something where we can exchange more on how we can work together.
Hello, good evening. My name is Babatunde, obviously also from Nigeria. Can you hear me? We have all been talking about what happens when the victims arrive here or when they are, let's say, on the transit to come here. And I believe an area where we should also draw our attention to is the mindset in society that actually triggers this thing that turns human beings into commodity, more or less. And we should also think about that, because I believe that if we can tackle that and get and put an end to the idea of a lady because most of the times the victims are female, a lady just becoming a commodity that can just be traded just like money or any other commodity in this world. Thank you.
I just want to make a remark, at least before this whole thing ends. I want to thank the organization as well as the Nigerian government for working hand in hand as well to make sure that this trafficking is reduced. The statistics you gave already there was, it can be, it's a sign of a positive thing, but can also be sign of more things to be done. For example, the 28% of it, or 20%, yeah, shows that could be the positive thing about that means that more and more people are coming out to report to people, and that's something good. But it also means that there are a lot of things going on. So it could be both ways. In any case, we wanted also to thank the organization for this, and I am also information oriented now because I had an experience last year where a friend of mine in Nigeria called me and told me his sister is missing for days. They don't know where she went. She just decided to leave home. Probably someone took her out without the information of the parents. And then after 1 week, she called me and they said she's in Italy. And then I asked for the number. They were not able to get the number to be able to contact. And then the next thing, she is in France. And then the next thing, Netherlands. And finally, she came to Switzerland. And then she called me back and told me she's now in Switzerland. Can you please help? And then I said, what's the background of this? And then she told me that there's a family that threatened me, their own family, over this, and they don't know what to do. What can I do? I don't know who to contact, but I do know that there are helpline here. So I got the number, I spoke with her, and then she gave me the number of the person doing this in Germany. I contacted the person, and she was I tried to make kind of a peace agreement, private agreement to avoid threatening this lady, but she went all out with me. She was really angry. And then I told her, well, I think you want to end up in jail. If you go by this way, if this is what you choose to do, then you go by the law. Then I contacted this lady in Lausanne. She was in Lausanne in the asylum home. And then I spoke with the refugee, those in charge in the refugee there. And I told her, please help this lady. She will give you the information you need. I told her to please give, don't worry. If anything goes wrong, let it be on that'll be my responsibility. And she spoke with them. And then the authorities went to investigate, and then they found out it was true. They helped her out of it. I did not know who to contact. This year alone, I've met 3 persons calling me as well. I don't know who to contact, which was why this conference is very useful. So I got the booklet. I saw the numbers, but I didn't see anyone from Bern. And if they are in different cantons, and you call in the line, how would they? I think someone asked if there's an office here that can easily get access to them, then link up with these offices. If there are offices here in Bern, that would be nice. For the police, that seems to be a difficult thing. Nobody wants to use the police as the first line of contact. So everyone tends to look for something else. So again, that links up to what my friend is saying, which is the fees, where the fees will be people you can trust. But then you need, part of my first question I asked, who's working with fees? Because you need people from these different countries where the trafficking is high to be part of working with you, because then you can get more information and you can get results as successful as you can. And then these victims they can feel, they have that trust to speak with the person because he knows what's going on. And then they can pass the information to you that will be helpful to be able to investigate such cases and then can proceed on. So that's just all.
That the identification of victims is very difficult because trafficking is a hidden crime, and if we don't identify the victims, they don't get the possibility to recover and to reintegrate. On the other hand, without victims' testimonies, there are no investigations going to be carried out. So what we need is also like a strong prosecution. We need also judgments against traffickers, as well as the protection of victims. It has been already pointed out by Ambassador Pietro Mona that we have the migration partnerships, and in this frame, a delegation led by FEDPOL will be visiting Nigeria in November. So we will have a study visit and where we'll try to explore future ways of cooperation with Nigerian authorities as well as civil society organizations. So I'm looking very forward to learn more about your country, also to get to know authorities like NAPTIP and civil society organizations. And I'm very glad to be here at this event because I already spoke to some of you, also like from the African Diaspora Organization, and this study visit is just the first step of like a project between Switzerland and Nigeria. So after this visit, we also like to get back to some of you, and maybe we could organize like a session after this study visit to exchange and to see how could we cooperate in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Adriana. On behalf of the International Office of Migration and the Embassy of Nigeria, I thank everybody for attending the seminar today, and I wish everybody a safe trip back home. Right now, the session is closed and we can go out and have our lunch. Thank you very much.